He was just a poor single dad working maintenance in a company where no one knew his name. Used to being invisible. Used to being looked through. Then, the cold, untouchable CEO called him into her office on a Tuesday afternoon and asked him to dinner. He thought it was a mistake, a joke, some kind of HR prank. It wasn't. The dinner happened in front of her billionaire family, and right there, in a room full of crystal glassware and inherited wealth, she looked her parents in the eye and said, "I'm going to marry him." A fork hit the floor. The room went silent, and the man who had never once been chosen, never been picked first, never been anyone's plan A, stood there in a borrowed blazer, not knowing that his entire life had just been rearranged. He didn't know she'd been watching him for months. He didn't know she was desperate. He didn't know that the deal she was about to offer him would cost them both everything and give them something neither of them had expected to want. Daniel Marsh had a system. He woke at 5:15, made coffee with the cheap grounds from the big tin, not the nice stuff, packed a lunch for himself, sandwich, apple, a bag of crackers, and a lunch for his daughter, Lily. Peanut butter on wheat, banana, a small juice box with the straw already poked in. He walked Lily to school by 7:40. He was clocked in at Vantage Systems by 8:05. The system worked. It had worked for 3 years. He didn't think about the fact that it had started the week his wife, Carolyn, left not for another man, not for anything dramatic, just for a different life she said she'd always wanted and had never told him about. She'd signed the papers without argument. She visited Lily twice a year, sent birthday cards on time, and carried the polite, comfortable guilt of someone who'd made a clean exit. Daniel didn't hate her for it. He just didn't think about her much anymore. He had the system. His official title at Vantage Systems was Facilities Maintenance Technician, Level 2. In practice, this meant he fixed things. Thermostats, server room cooling units, the perpetually broken coffee machine on the 4th floor that nobody could figure out except him. He wore a gray uniform with a small embroidered patch that said Daniel on the chest pocket. He kept a toolkit on a cart that had one squeaky wheel he'd never bothered to oil, a small, private joke he kept to himself. The people at Vantage Systems were, for the most part, polite, politely ignoring. The kind of polite that doesn't require you to actually see someone. A marketing coordinator named Brittany once referred to him as the maintenance guy, directly to his face, to another person, while standing 3 feet away from him. He'd replaced the bulb she asked him to replace and moved on. He was 38 years old. He had a daughter who drew horses on the back of her homework. He had a 1-bedroom apartment where Lily slept in the bedroom, and he slept on a fold-out in the living room that he folded back up every morning before she woke. He had a toolbox that was older than his marriage and better cared for. He was, by most measures of the people in that building, nobody. But there was one afternoon, about 2 months before the dinner, that changed things, at least behind the scenes, in ways Daniel didn't yet understand. He'd been doing a routine check of the server room on the 9th floor when he noticed something. A cooling unit running hot on one side, the sensor feed showing inconsistent temperature cycling. He ran a diagnostic, found a calibration error in the intake monitoring system, a small software flag that the automated maintenance log had marked as resolved 6 weeks ago, but clearly hadn't been. If it had gone on another 48 hours, it would have triggered a full thermal event, the kind that takes servers down for days. He fixed it in 40 minutes, filed a report, flagged it to his supervisor, a tired man named Greg, who forwarded it upstairs with a single line. Maintenance caught an issue. Details attached. Nobody came down to thank him. He clocked out, picked up Lily, made pasta for dinner, and helped her draw a horse that she named Butterscotch. That was the end of it, or so he thought. 3 floors above the server room, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling glass and a view of the downtown skyline, someone had read that maintenance report very carefully. Alexandra Voss had been CEO of Vantage Systems for 4 years. She'd been handed nothing. That was the story she told herself, and it was mostly true. She'd earned her position through a combination of strategic intelligence, complete personal sacrifice, and the ability to function on 4 hours of sleep without noticeable deterioration. She'd rebuilt the company's enterprise division from a money-losing liability into a growth engine that now accounted for 60% of revenue. The part she left out of the story was that Vantage Systems had been founded by her grandfather, that her family still held a controlling share, and that no matter how hard she worked, there would always be people in that boardroom who looked at her and saw the heir before they saw the executive. She was 36. She wore charcoal and navy. Her hair was dark, cut precisely, and never moved during presentations. She had not had a personal relationship of any kind, romantic, social, recreational, in approximately 3 years. She ate at her desk. She ran 6 miles every morning before dawn in a neighborhood that was quiet and dark and asked nothing of her. She was, by the consensus of everyone who worked for her, formidable. By the consensus of her family, she was a disappointment on one particular front. The Voss family had money the way other families have furniture inherited. Everywhere, taken entirely for granted. Her father, George Voss, had married her mother, Helen, in a union that had been celebrated in 2 city papers. Her older brother had married the daughter of a banking family in a wedding that made the society pages. Alexandra had not married anyone. George Voss had opinions about this. Loud ones, delivered quietly, in the particular register of old money fathers who don't raise their voices because they don't have to. There was a man named Preston Whitfield he'd been mentioning for the past 8 months. The Whitfields owned a real estate development firm. Preston was 42. Divorced once, had the handshake of someone who practiced handshakes. Alexandra had met him twice at family dinners. Both times, he'd interrupted her 3 times in 20 minutes and corrected something she'd said about her own industry. Her father had a plan. A specific, calendared, inherited wealth kind of plan that involved Preston Whitfield and a merger of both family interests and both family companies. The dinner was in 3 weeks. Alexandra had exactly 3 weeks to produce a reason why she could not, under any circumstances, be available for that arrangement. She had considered many options. She kept coming back to one. She'd noticed Daniel Marsh the same way she noticed most things. Obliquely, over time, through accumulation of small observations. She'd seen him working the server room. The afternoon of the cooling unit incident had watched through the glass partition for a few minutes before a call pulled her away. She'd read the report. Greg forwarded and understood immediately that the man who filed it knew exactly what he was looking at and had fixed something that could have cost them significantly. She'd also seen him, on 3 separate occasions, in the lobby, at the end of the day, waiting for a small girl with a backpack shaped like a pink elephant, who came barreling through the revolving door and launched herself at his knees with the kind of full-body trust that children only extend to people who've never once let them down. She'd watched him crouch to Lily's level, listening with total focus while the girl described something complicated with her hands. She'd watched him carry her on his shoulders to the parking lot, the girl wearing his gray cap, both of them laughing at something Alexandra couldn't hear. She'd run 17 different scenarios in her mind about the dinner, the arrangement, the Whitfield situation. This was the only one that had all the pieces. She buzzed her assistant on a Tuesday afternoon. "Get me Daniel Marsh from facilities." He thought he'd done something wrong. That was his first thought when Greg told him he was wanted upstairs. People from facilities got called to the executive floor for one of 2 reasons. Something was broken or something was over. He ran a mental checklist of every job he'd done in the past 2 weeks and came up with nothing. He took the elevator up. The 9th floor smelled different from the rest of the building cleaner, somehow, or maybe just quieter. The carpet was thicker. The light was better. A young woman named Priya led him to the corner office. Alexandra Voss was standing at her window with her back to him. She turned when he came in. He'd seen her before in passing, at all-hands meetings where he stood in the back. He hadn't been this close to her. She was composed in the specific way of people who've practiced composure until it became architecture. She looked at him directly. Without the reflexive pause he was used to, the pause people made when they processed what he was and recalibrated their register accordingly. "Daniel Marsh," she said. Yes, ma'am. Sit down. He sat. She was quiet for a moment in a way that wasn't awkward for her, just a calculation being completed. You're free this Friday evening, she said. It wasn't a question. He blinked. I have my daughter. We can arrange childcare. Through the company. Fully covered. He stared at her. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to have dinner with me Friday evening. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a phone rang and was answered. Why? He said. It came out flat, without inflection, because he was genuinely unable to frame it as anything else. Why would Alexandra Voss, CEO, woman who wore watches that cost more than his car, ask a facilities technician to dinner? She looked at him for a long moment. Because I need someone I can trust, she said. And you've spent 18 months in this building being competent and invisible. Those are two qualities I find very useful right now. He waited. I need you to come as my guest. Not as an employee. She paused. I'd like you to present yourself as someone I've been seeing. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. A date? He said. An escort, technically. For a family dinner. He looked at her. He thought about Lily. He thought about the fold-out couch, the big tin of cheap coffee, the system. You'd be compensated, she said. He stood up. I don't need your money. She didn't flinch. Then consider it a favor. You saved this company a significant hardware crisis 6 weeks ago and received no acknowledgement. Consider Friday an acknowledgement. It was a manipulative framing, and they both knew it. He stood there for another moment, his cap in both hands. What time? He said. He wore the only blazer he owned, dark blue, bought for a job interview 4 years ago. It still fit. He'd polished his shoes. He smelled like the cedar soap he kept for occasions. Priya had arranged for a woman named Ruth to watch Lily, a warm, capable retired schoolteacher who lived 2 blocks away and whom Lily adored. He'd explained he had a work event. Lily had accepted this with the easygoing practicality of a child who understood that her father sometimes had to do things for reasons she'd learn about later. He met Alexandra in the lobby of a building he'd never been inside. She was waiting, wearing something dark and simple that cost more than his monthly rent and somehow made that fact invisible. She looked at him and gave a short nod, the nod of a general confirming a detail before a campaign. We're going to my parents' house, she said. He stopped walking. You said a restaurant. I said a family dinner. I assumed. I know what you assumed. She kept walking. I need you to stay calm and let me handle the conversation. Answer questions simply. Don't overshare. Don't apologize for anything. He caught up to her. What exactly am I walking into? She stopped at the car, a black car with a driver who held the door without being asked. My father has been arranging a marriage for me, she said. To a man I have no intention of marrying. The dinner to formalize that arrangement is in 3 weeks. I need tonight to complicate that timeline. She got into the car. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then he got in. The Voss family house was 40 minutes outside the city, a property that announced itself with iron gates and a long gravel drive lined with trees that had been planted so long ago they'd grown into a canopy. The house at the end of it was large in the way of houses that are never called mansions by the people who own them. Inside, high ceilings, good paintings, a dining room table set for 6. Candles. Silver that matched. George Voss stood when they came in. He was 70, barrel-chested, white-haired, with the steady eyes of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that other people had to live with. He looked at Daniel the way a man looks at a car he hasn't decided whether to buy. Helen Voss was seated, and she watched Daniel with a pleasant smile that contained multitudes of judgment. Alexandra's brother, Robert, and his wife, Claire, completed the table. Everyone, Alexandra said, this is Daniel. The first 40 minutes were methodical. George asked about Daniel's work. Daniel said he was in facilities management at Vantage Systems, which was true, and which produced a very particular kind of pause in George Voss's expression. Helen asked where he'd gone to school. He named a state university. She nodded in the specific way of someone converting information into a number. Robert asked, with practiced offhandedness, whether Daniel had any interest in real estate. Daniel said no. Claire asked how he and Alexandra had met. Daniel looked at Alexandra. He saved the company from a major systems failure, Alexandra said. I noticed. This produced a moment of stillness. It was not the love story anyone at the table had been expecting. The food came. It was excellent. Daniel ate carefully and said little, because saying little was the truest thing he could contribute, and also because he was acutely aware that every word he said would be weighed and catalogued. George refilled his own wine glass and did not offer the same to Daniel. Alexandra, George said, in the register of a man tabling a motion. You know the Whitfields are expecting us in 3 weeks. I know. Preston has been very patient. Preston has been very patient, she agreed, in a tone that made the words mean something else entirely. Your mother and I feel. I know what you feel. She set her fork down, with the deliberate care of someone who has decided that a specific moment has arrived. I want you to hear me clearly, Dad. The table went still. Alexandra looked at her father, then at her mother. Then she said it. I'm going to marry Daniel. A beat. A fork hit the tablecloth. George Voss became very, very still, the stillness of a man rereading a document that says something he didn't expect. Helen said, Darling, I know this isn't the announcement you wanted, Alexandra continued. I know it doesn't fit the plan, but I'm telling you now so that you have time to adjust. She was calm. She was composed. She was architecture. Daniel sat in the chair next to her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He was 3 moves behind in a game he hadn't known was being played, and the only thing he could do was not make it worse. George Voss looked at Daniel for a long time. Leave us, he said. He meant everyone. Robert and Claire stood. Helen began to rise. He stays, Alexandra said. George Voss looked at his daughter. The two of them existed in a silence that had been years in the making. Then George Voss stood, folded his napkin, and left the room. They didn't speak until the driver pulled out of the gate. You didn't tell me that's what you were going to say, Daniel said. I know. You told me I was accompanying you to a dinner. You didn't tell me you were going to announce our engagement to people who have lawyers. I needed your reaction to be genuine. He looked at her. My reaction. If you'd known in advance, you would have tried to negotiate, or back out. Either way, your face would have been wrong. He was quiet for a moment, processing this. You used me, he said. Yes. She didn't soften it. That was always the arrangement. I compensated you. I told you I didn't want your money, and I respect that. But this is what I needed, Daniel. And you agreed to come. I agreed to come to a dinner. Not to be announced as your future husband to 2 people who are now going to run my name through every database they have access to. She was quiet. I have a daughter, he said. I have a job. I have a life that is small and specific, and it works because nothing in it is complicated. You just made it complicated. She looked out the window at the dark trees passing. I can make sure nothing touches you, she said. My father respects arrangements. If I draw a clear line, your father looked at me like I was a door that opened onto the wrong room. He shook his head. What happens in 3 weeks? When the Whitfield dinner comes and they're expecting you to have done something about this? She was quiet again. We'd need to maintain it, she said finally. For how long? She didn't answer. That was an answer. He looked at his window. The city was coming back into view. Orange and sprawling. Tell me the terms, he said. She turned to look at him. Tell me exactly what you're asking for. Hours, duration, expectations. And tell me what you're offering. Not money. Something real. She studied him. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected refusal, or a price negotiation, or wounded anger that required managing. Not this. 3 months, she said slowly. Enough appearances to make the Whitfield arrangement untenable. A formal end to the situation, something that looks like a mutual decision. Nothing that reflects badly on you. She thought for a moment. I can have your daughter enrolled in one of the better school programs in the district. Quietly, through channels that don't connect back to this. Not as payment, as a correction of something that should have been available to her already. He said nothing. And I'll acknowledge the server room incident properly, she said. Not as leverage. Because it was the right thing to do, and it wasn't done. The car moved through the city. He looked straight ahead. 3 months, he said. 3 months. And you treat my daughter with respect. Of course. He was quiet for a long time. This is going to go wrong, he said. Probably. He almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised them both. All right, he said. The first 2 weeks were strange. They'd worked out the logistics. He and Lily would come to her apartment for dinners, twice-a-week appearances that could be corroborated if needed. She'd attend one event at his neighborhood, something casual, visible. He expected her to be stilted around his daughter. People who had no experience with children usually were, they overcorrected, spoke too loudly or too formally, made awkward jokes that landed wrong. Alexandra Voss did none of that. She came to the first dinner with no performance. She sat at his kitchen table, a table with a sticky spot near the corner that he'd never fully solved, and watched Lily explain the hierarchy of her class's rabbit population with total, unironic focus. Biscuit is in charge, Lily said. He doesn't do anything, but everyone knows. That's true of most leadership structures, Alexandra said. Lily looked at her with sudden, deep appreciation. Daniel watched this from the stove. The second week, Lily asked if Alexandra could come to a school art show. He'd started to explain that she was busy, but Alexandra, who was on her phone near the window, said without looking up. What night? She came to the art show. She stood in front of Lily's painting a large, chaotic horse with one blue leg and tremendous confidence in its overall proportions, and studied it for a genuinely long time. It's fast, she said. It's running, Lily said. I can see that. Daniel watched her face. He was watching for the performance, the polished professional warmth that he'd expected her to deploy. It wasn't there. She was just looking at a painting, in the way of someone who had been handed something worth looking at. The third week, she showed up on a Wednesday with Thai food and a problem, a board presentation that wasn't landing, 3 slides that were losing the logic. She'd clearly planned to work on it at his kitchen table while he cooked, and had gotten partway through asking if that was acceptable before she registered that it was a strange thing to ask. The table's yours, he said. He cooked. She worked. Lily did homework at the other end of the table. All 3 of them existed in the same room, in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. At some point, she turned her laptop toward him. Tell me what's wrong with this slide. He looked at it. He was not a presentation professional. He was a man who fixed things for a living and had a very good sense of when something wasn't working. You're burying the conclusion, he said. The logic takes too long to get there. Start with the answer. She looked at the slide, looked at him, turned the laptop back. She rebuilt the slide in 12 minutes. Better, he said. She didn't say anything. But something in her shoulders changed. The fourth week was different. He'd had a hard day, a full-floor HVAC failure that took 9 hours to trace and cost him most of his lunch break and the particular grinding exhaustion of a problem that kept producing new problems. He clocked out late, picked up Lily, came home to a sink full of dishes from the night before that he hadn't had energy for then and didn't have energy for now. He was standing at the sink when his phone buzzed. Alexandra? Still on for dinner? He almost said no. He'd been about to say no. He'd already drafted the text in his head, something reasonable about needing to reschedule, fully intending to send it. He typed 7. She arrived at 6:50 with a bag from the Italian place 3 blocks away that he hadn't known was good because he'd never been able to afford to find out. She looked at the dishes, looked at him, set the food on the table, and started on the dishes herself without a word. No performance. No look how gracious I am. She just ran the water and started washing, the same way she handled everything directly, with her attention fully on the thing. He stood there for a moment, You don't have to. I know, she said, and kept going. Lily appeared from the bedroom, took in the situation with the quick calculus of a child who understands domestic dynamics, and immediately picked up a dish towel. They did the dishes. All three of them. The Italian food got slightly cold, but not too cold. This is the best pasta I've ever had, Lily announced. It costs $40, Alexandra said. Lily considered this. Still worth it, unquestionably. Daniel ate his pasta and said nothing, and listened to the two of them negotiate the relative pasta rankings of various places Lily had theoretically eaten, which Lily conducted with the seriousness of someone testifying before a committee. After dinner, Lily went to bed, and Daniel sat on the couch with his arms across his knees. Still tired, but differently tired, the kind of tired you can breathe through. "Thank you," he said, "for the food. You looked like you needed someone else to handle something." He looked at her. She was sitting in the chair across from him, a position she'd gradually settled into over the past weeks. The same chair, always the same chair, like she'd claimed it without either of them noting the claiming. "I did," he said. They sat in the quiet for a moment. Outside, a bus passed. The lamp made the room amber. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. Having it be simpler. Before all this, she thought about it with the honesty she'd started using with him, the kind that didn't arrive pre-packaged. "I don't think my simpler was ever simple," she said. "It was just contained, everything in the right compartment. I was very good at the compartments. And now?" She looked at the empty chair where Lily had been sitting. "The compartments have been rearranged somewhat," she said. He smiled. He wasn't sure, later, when the shift happened. It wasn't a moment. It was a direction, a slow drift. The way a boat moves, not because the helm has turned, but because the current has. He started to look forward to Wednesdays. She started to stay later than she needed to. Lily started calling her Alex instead of Miss Voss, and nobody corrected it. 5 weeks in, George Voss acted. He had resources and he'd used them. What he produced was a detailed profile of Daniel Marsh. Employment history, financial records, rental history, the divorce, Carolyn's departure, the custody arrangement that gave him full care. The Voss family attorney had assembled it in a way that was entirely legal and entirely designed to be used as a lever. George delivered it personally. He came to Vantage Systems, not to the executive floor, but to the facilities level. He found Daniel in the maintenance corridor outside the HVAC room, clipboard in hand, and he delivered the message with the courtesy of a man who doesn't need to raise his voice. George was in a suit, a very good suit, the kind Daniel had learned to identify over the past weeks by the particular way the fabric fell. He looked out of place in the corridor with its exposed conduit and fluorescent lighting, which Daniel suspected he knew, and which made the visit more deliberate rather than less. "You're a decent man," George said. "I can see that. Your daughter needs stability. Your situation is fragile. What happens to her if your position at this company becomes untenable?" Daniel looked at him. He'd been holding the clipboard. He set it down on the cart, carefully. "I'm listening," Daniel said. "I can make that happen," George said. "Or I can make the opposite happen. Better position, better salary, full health coverage. I have 3 people on this board who can make 1 phone call. And if I walk away from your daughter, walk away from this arrangement," George corrected, gently. "My daughter is going to be fine. She always lands on her feet. She doesn't need someone who complicates her life." Daniel was very still. The corridor hummed around them, the building's constant, quiet machinery, the systems that kept everything running, the invisible work that nobody noticed until it stopped. He thought about everything George was saying. He thought about it honestly. The man was not entirely wrong. Daniel's position was fragile. Lily's stability was not guaranteed. He'd been holding both of those truths at arm's length for weeks because the alternative had felt too good to look at directly. "What complicates her life," he said, "is the fact that you've spent 30 years making every decision she should have been making herself." George looked at him. "She's rebuilt your company's revenue engine. She's run a division that feeds 2/3 of this organization. She is, by any reasonable measure, the most capable person in your family business, and you're standing here trying to trade her to a man who interrupted her 3 times in 20 minutes. He paused. I was at that dinner too. I was watching. George's expression didn't change. But something behind it moved a very slight recalibration. The adjustment of a man who has been read accurately by someone he'd assessed as unreadable. You're emotionally involved, George said. That's not what I said. It's what I heard. Daniel picked up his clipboard. She doesn't need your arrangement, he said. She needs someone to stop rearranging her. Think about your daughter, George said. He left. The corridor returned to its normal quiet. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a pressure reading cycled through its routine. Daniel stood there for a long moment. He thought about Lily. He thought about the pink elephant backpack and the horse named Butterscotch and the note in purple marker. He thought about the school enrollment that was already in process. He thought about the distance between the world George Voss inhabited and the world he and Lily actually lived in, and how that distance was not abstract. It was money, leverage, the specific power of people who could make phone calls that changed things. He thought about Alexandra. He thought about what he would be choosing, and what he would be protecting, and whether those two things could coexist. He clocked out early and went to get Lily from school. Daniel drove to pick up Lily from school. He watched her come through the gate pink elephant backpack, a folded drawing in her hand, a streak of something blue on her sleeve. She launched herself at him the way she always did, full trust, full commitment. He held her for a moment longer than usual. That night, after she was asleep, he sat in the living room with the fold-out couch folded out and the lamp on low, and thought for a long time. He thought about the things George Voss had said. He thought about Lily's school enrollment, the better district, the opportunity that had already been set in motion. He thought about what happened if that stopped. He thought about what happened if his job stopped. He thought about Alexandra, not CEO Alexandra. The one who had leaned over Lily's homework on a Tuesday to explain fractions in a way that made Lily actually understand them. The one who'd stood in front of a painting of an improbable horse for a genuinely long time. He thought about what he was to her. He'd told himself it was an arrangement. He'd told himself he understood the terms. He was no longer entirely sure he understood the terms. In the morning, he called Alexandra. I think we should end it, he said. The arrangement. A pause. Because your father came to see me. And because he was right that this is complicated. And because I'm not the kind of person who can do this without it becoming real for me. And I don't think that was part of what you wanted. Another pause. Longer. Daniel, the school enrollment is still in process, right? It doesn't stop if I step back? I would never. Her voice had changed register, and then she controlled it. No. That's done. That's not contingent. Then we're okay, he said. You'll figure out the Whitfield thing. You're good at that. She said his name again, differently. I've got to take Lily to school, he said. He hung up. He returned to the system. 5:15. Coffee. Lunch is packed. Lily to school by 7:40. Clocked in by 8:05. The squeaky wheel on the cart. The fourth-floor coffee machine. The building's endless small failures that needed someone who knew how to look at a thing and understand what was wrong with it. He worked. He was good at his work. The building held itself together partly because of him, and that had always been enough, and he kept telling himself it was still enough, and some mornings he believed it. A week passed. Then another. He replaced a faulty circulation pump in the basement that had been slowly failing for 3 months. That everyone on the monitoring system had been noting in reports without acting on. He caught it, sourced the replacement part, ran the repair in an afternoon. He filed the report. Greg forwarded it. Nobody came down. He ate his sandwich in the maintenance bay and thought more than he wanted to. Lily noticed. She was 7 years old. She noticed things the way children do, not with words at first, but with presence. She sat closer to him at dinner. She showed him more drawings than usual. She left a note on the fold-out couch that said, "You are my best dad," in purple marker, which he found at 5:15 on a Tuesday and stood holding for longer than he could account for. On a Thursday, she asked, "Is Alex coming Wednesday?" He said he didn't think so. She was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a child who is not going to let something go but is choosing the right moment. "Did something happen?" she asked. "Grown-up stuff," he said. She considered this with the philosophical patience of someone who has spent her whole life waiting for grown-ups to sort themselves out. "Grown-up stuff is usually dumb," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It usually is." She went back to her drawing. She was working on a new horse different from the others, this one still, standing in a field, not running anywhere. He looked at it for a moment. He thought about what it meant, a horse that wasn't going anywhere, and decided not to think about it. He called his sister Claire in Colorado that weekend. Claire, not Robert's wife, Claire, his own sister, who was practical and direct and whom he'd been avoiding calling because she would say the true thing. She said the true thing. "You left because you were scared," she said. "I left because it was complicated. Everything real is complicated, Daniel. The only uncomplicated things are the things that don't matter." He held the phone and looked at the ceiling of the apartment, which had a water stain in the corner from a leak that had been repaired 2 years ago. He knew the repair history of this ceiling the way he knew the repair history of most things. "Do you love her?" Claire asked. "I don't know." "You know." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know what I'd be to her," he said finally. "Outside of the arrangement, she runs a company. Her family has a gate at the end of their driveway. I have a fold-out couch and a squeaky cart. She came to your kids' art show," Claire said. "She ate your pasta. She did your dishes without being asked." A pause. "People do not do dishes they don't want to do. She was there because she wanted to be there." He stared at the water stain. "What if she figures out it's not enough?" he said. "What if she looks at this life 6 months from now and—" "She's been looking at your life for months," Claire said. "She's had time to figure it out. She kept showing up on Wednesdays." A pause, softer. "Or she was." He didn't have an answer for that. After he hung up, he sat in the quiet of the apartment for a long time. The fold-out couch was folded out. The lamp was on. Lily's drawing was on the kitchen table, the still horse, the one that wasn't running anywhere. He looked at it from across the room. He thought about the system, about how he'd built it for surviving, for getting through, about how every decision inside it was a decision against wanting too much. Because wanting too much led to the kind of pain that didn't have a maintenance protocol. Then he thought about what it had cost him. He stared at the ceiling. Alexandra Voss called the family attorney on a Thursday morning and told him to stop all preliminary work on the Whitfield arrangement. She called her brother Robert and told him to tell their father. Then she went into a board meeting and ran it with complete competence for 2 hours, while a completely different part of her mind worked through a problem that had no slide deck and no logic structure and no clean answer. Her father called it 4. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I've been making your mistakes for years," she said. "I'd like to try my own for a while." George was quiet. "The Whitfields will withdraw their interest," he said. "Good. You'll lose the board support that Preston's family brings. I'll rebuild it. You're choosing." He stopped himself. "This man has nothing. He has everything that matters," she said. "I've spent 3 years in a room by myself trying to figure out what I'm building all of this for. He's the only person I've met in that time who made the room feel like it was worth coming out of." Another silence. "Dad." Her voice was careful, not unkind. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you, as your daughter, that I'm done living in the plan you made. I hope you can get there with me on this, but I'm going." She hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment, looking at the skyline. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. She came to his apartment without calling. He answered the door in a gray t-shirt and an expression of pure, startled incomprehension. Behind him, Lily was visible at the kitchen table, coloring something elaborate. "I resigned from the Voss board seat," Alexandra said. He stared at her. I'm keeping my CEO position, that's mine. I earned it. But I resigned the family seat, which means my father's leverage over company matters is considerably reduced, which means certain arrangements he was considering are no longer viable. She paused. I also told him that the Whitfield situation was finished. Permanently. He stood in the doorway. I came to say something, she said. Not as a negotiation, not with terms. She looked at him directly. I came to say that I don't need the arrangement anymore. I don't need a shield, or a tactic, or a timeline. Something was happening in his chest that he had no maintenance protocol for. I came to say that I've been in that apartment by myself for years, and I forgot what it felt like to be in a room with people who aren't performing at each other. And then I was at your kitchen table. She stopped. I came because the horse painting is the best thing I've seen in a year, and I want to see what she makes next. He said nothing. I'm not asking for a decision, she said. I'm just. She stopped again, not because she'd lost the words, because she was being careful with them. I'm telling you that this stopped being an arrangement for me a while ago, and I should have said it instead of waiting for you to say it first. Behind him, Lily's chair scraped. Small footsteps crossed the kitchen. Lily appeared at his side, looked at Alexandra, and said, Are you staying for dinner? Dad's making the pasta. Daniel looked down at his daughter. He looked up at Alexandra. She was watching him with the expression of someone who has already made their decision and is simply waiting to see if it lands. He stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. She stayed for dinner. She stayed for the dishes. She stayed while Lily showed her the latest drawing, not a horse this time, a whole herd of them. 18 horses in varying sizes, galloping across a construction paper plain with enormous confidence in their own momentum. She stayed until Lily fell asleep, which happened at 8:43 with her face on her own arm, drawing still clutched in her hand. He and Alexandra sat at the kitchen table after, with the lamp on low and 2 cups of the cheap coffee he'd apologized for it, and she'd said don't and meant it. I'm not easy, she said. I know. I'm better at systems than people. I work too much. I have a father who's going to take time. My kid calls you Alex and draws you pictures, he said. Whatever happens with your father, that part's already settled. She looked at her coffee cup. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. He turned the cup in his hands. Carolyn, leaving, I stopped believing in the forward together thing. I figured I'd just get good at the right now thing, get Lily to school, keep the lights on, fix what's broken. That's not a bad philosophy. It's a partial one. He looked up. The part I was missing was, I don't know, the not being alone part. I didn't let myself miss it because I didn't have room for it. She was very still. You've got room now? She asked. He thought about it. I think I built some, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she did something he hadn't seen her do before. She smiled. Not the contained, professional expression she deployed in meetings. Something smaller and entirely unmanaged, a thing that arrived because it couldn't not arrive. He smiled back. Outside, the city did its quiet nocturnal business. A distant siren, a car door closing somewhere, the specific hush of a neighborhood that has settled into its own breathing. The pasta was good, she said. It's the system, he said. Tell me the system, he told her. The 5:15 wake-up, the big tin of coffee, the lunches packed, the squeaky wheel on the cart he'd never oiled, the 4th-floor coffee machine that responded to a specific percussive approach that was not technically in the manual. She listened like someone filing information she intended to keep. I like the system, she said. It's missing some things. She looked at him. The lamp made the kitchen warm. Lily's drawing of the herd was on the table between them. 18 horses running together, none of them alone. We can add things, she said. The wedding was 14 months later. No society pages, no formal announcement, no caterer who required a 6-month booking lead. It was a Saturday in October, at a park 15 minutes from their apartment. The apartment they'd spent 4 months combining into something that contained both her clean lines and his functional chaos, and had, somehow, become the best version of both. Robert and Claire Voss came. George and Helen came, which no one had guaranteed but everyone had hoped for. George shook Daniel's hand, and the handshake was not warm, but it was not a formality either. It was the handshake of a man revising a position he'd held for a long time, which takes a different kind of strength than holding it. Lily was the flower girl. She wore a white dress and carried a basket, and walked with the radical confidence of someone who understands that this event is both deeply important and fundamentally good, and who has no patience for anything other than getting on with it. Daniel's sister, Claire, from Colorado, stood in the back and cried during the vows, which she later denied. Alexandra wore something dark and simple, and her hair moved, slightly, in the October wind, and she didn't adjust it. Daniel wore the blue blazer, the same one from that first dinner, the one that had survived a job interview and an ambush dinner and one terrible night on a gravel drive. It still fit. He'd polished the shoes. After, they ate at 3 long tables pushed together in the park, food from 4 different places, paper plates, a cake that Lily had selected and which had purple frosting and was shaped roughly like a horse. His sister pulled him aside near the end and said, "You look different, like someone who stopped being only for other people," she said. "Started being for yourself a little too." He thought about that. "Lily did the heavy lifting," he said. "Lily always does." He looked across the park. Alexandra was sitting with Lily, the two of them close together, over something on the table, another drawing, he thought. Another horse, another small world being put on paper with total confidence in its own proportions. He stood there for a moment and let himself look. He had been invisible for a long time. He had been no one's plan A. He had been the man with the squeaky cart and the fold-out couch and the borrowed blazer. He was still all of those things. But he was also, now, standing in October light, watching the 2 people who were the whole of his world sit together and make something. And he understood that the system, the good, working, necessary system, had always been missing exactly this. Not missing in a way that made it broken. Missing the way a house with no one in it is structurally complete but not yet a home. The walls hold, the lights work, but a house needs people inside it for the warmth to have anywhere to go. He had built a good structure. He had just needed someone to share it with. He walked back toward the table. Lily looked up when he got there. She pushed the drawing toward him, the newest one. Not a horse this time, but 3 figures. And above them, in Lily's careful 7-year-old letters, "Us." He sat down. Alexandra looked at the drawing. Then, at him, he looked back. Outside, somewhere, the city went about its ordinary business, sirens and buses, and the particular October wind that smelled like something ending and something starting. The trees in the park had gone amber and rust and gold. He picked up a crayon. He started drawing, and that was enough. That was, in fact, everything.